Jae-Min Kwon survived the attack. That much was certain. What no one could explain was why the most powerful man in the room no longer knew who he was, and why the first crack in the silence came from a waitress no one had ever bothered to remember. The restaurant was called Hanul, a name that meant sky in Korean. From the outside, it looked refined but unremarkable. Dark glass, brushed steel lettering, warm light spilling softly onto the sidewalk. The kind of place executives chose for quiet dinners and critics praised for elegance. People walked past it every night without realizing anything important ever happened inside. Naomi Carter knew better. After nearly 2 years of working there, she'd learned to recognize the details others ignored. The men who never checked menus but always chose the same seats. The way conversations stopped when a certain presence entered the room. The private elevator that didn't appear on any public floor plan. The late-night reservations booked under no name at all. Hanul wasn't just a restaurant. It was where decisions were made. Quietly, permanently. And at the center of it all was Jae-Min Kwon. He was younger than people expected. Sharper too. Always controlled. Always listening more than he spoke. When he entered a room, no one announced him. Yet everyone adjusted. Naomi had seen him reduce grown men to silence with nothing more than a look. She'd also seen him make sure kitchen staff ate before service and quietly cover a server's medical bill without letting her know who paid it. That contradiction unsettled her. To Naomi, he wasn't frightening. He was precise, distant. A man who carried weight without ever reminding anyone of it. Their interactions were brief. Orders given, acknowledgments exchanged. But there was a steadiness there. Trust maybe. Or something that looked like it. On the night everything began to unravel, Naomi noticed the shift before anyone else did. The tension in his posture. The way his attention lingered too long on exits instead of faces. When he passed her in the corridor, he stopped. "Be observant tonight," he said quietly. "And if anything feels wrong, leave." It wasn't a request. An hour later, the city kept breathing as if nothing had changed. And by morning, Jae-Min Kwon would wake up with no memory of the man he'd been. No power. No past. No name. Except for the one Naomi Carter would refuse to let him forget. By 7 every evening, Hanul filled the way it always did. Quietly, deliberately, like a held breath. Soft jazz hummed beneath conversation, barely loud enough to register. Candles glowed against dark wood tables. Everything was designed to feel calm, effortless, harmless. Naomi Carter moved through it all with practiced ease. She had learned early that the best way to survive here was to be invisible. She walked smoothly, never rushed, never lingering. She remembered preferences without writing them down. Who liked their tea refilled before it cooled? Who hated to be interrupted? Which tables expected silence more than service? Most nights, the guests barely noticed her. That was fine. Naomi didn't need their attention. She needed the job. The steady pay. The sense of control that came from knowing exactly where she belonged in a room that wasn't hers. But there were moments, small ones, when the illusion slipped. Men in tailored suits who never asked for a check. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence when a shadow crossed the doorway. Phones that appeared under tables. Screens lighting faces for half a second before disappearing again. Naomi didn't listen. She didn't ask. She had learned that curiosity was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. Still, she noticed everything. Especially Jae-Min Kwon. He rarely arrived with ceremony. No entourage. No raised voices. Yet the restaurant subtly rearranged itself around him. Chairs straightened. Staff moved faster without being told. Even the air felt different. Denser, more alert. Tonight, he sat at his usual table near the back, where the light was low and the view of the room was complete. His posture was relaxed, but his attention wasn't. Naomi had seen that look before. Not tension exactly, but calculation. As if he were listening to things no one else could hear. When she approached with his drink, he glanced up. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm, measured. Their eyes met for a fraction longer than necessary. It wasn't intimate. It wasn't personal. But Naomi felt it anyway, that subtle acknowledgement. As if he knew she was capable. As if he trusted her to exist in the same silence he did. She nodded and stepped away. From the corner of the room, she watched him interact with others. He spoke little. When he did, people leaned in. When he paused, no one rushed to fill the space. Authority didn't cling to him like noise. It settled, heavy and unquestioned. Naomi wondered, not for the first time, what it would be like to carry that kind of certainty. To walk into a room knowing nothing could touch you unless you allowed it. She turned back to her work, reminding herself that none of this was her concern. Hanul was just a restaurant. Jae-Min Kwon was just her employer. And power, real power, belonged to people who were never meant to notice someone like her. Still, as the night deepened and the city pressed closer to the windows, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was moving beneath the surface. And that whatever it was already too late to step away. Jae-Min Kwon didn't need to raise his voice. Naomi noticed that first. In a room full of men accustomed to being obeyed. He spoke softly, almost casually, and still everyone leaned toward him as if pulled by gravity. Conversations paused when he did. Decisions waited. Even disagreements softened around him, reshaped into something careful and polite. Power, Naomi realized, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply expected compliance. She watched him from the edge of the room as she cleared plates and refilled glasses. He listened more than he spoke, eyes steady, expression unreadable. When someone laughed too loudly, the sound faded on its own. When a man across the table gestured sharply, Jae-Min responded with a single look, cool, measured, and the gesture stopped halfway through the air. There was no threat in it, just certainty. He dressed simply compared to the others. Dark suit, no flash, nothing that begged for attention. Yet somehow, he was the only one who didn't feel replaceable. Naomi had seen men like this before. Men who mistook noise for authority, cruelty for strength. Jae-Min was different. His restraint felt deliberate, like a blade kept sheathed because there was no need to draw it. Once, a guest complained quietly about a dish, irritation sharpened by entitlement. Naomi braced herself, already preparing an apology. Before she could speak, Jae-Min turned slightly in his chair. "There's no issue," he said, calm and even. "It will be handled." He didn't look at the guest again. The complaint vanished, swallowed by the certainty in his tone. Later, Naomi found the kitchen already correcting the mistake. No orders raised, no tempers flared. The problem had dissolved before it could become a scene. That was how he ruled, by preventing chaos rather than reacting to it. When he finally stood to leave, the room shifted with him. Chairs moved back. Conversations paused. Eyes followed his path without making it obvious. Naomi stepped aside instinctively, lowering her gaze as he passed. He stopped. "Good work tonight," he said quietly. It wasn't praise. It wasn't flirtation. Just acknowledgement. Naomi looked up, startled. He was already turning away, the moment gone as quickly as it had arrived. But the effect lingered. Her chest felt tight, not with fear but with something steadier. Recognition, maybe. As he disappeared through the back corridor, Naomi understood something she hadn't before. Everyone in that room listened to Jae-Min Kwon because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. She listened because she trusted that he knew exactly what he was doing. And somehow that felt far more dangerous. The silence didn't arrive all at once. Crept in. Naomi noticed it first in the pauses, those fractions of a second where conversation stalled and didn't quite recover. Regular guests arrived later than usual, then left earlier. A table that was normally reserved weeks in advance sat empty, untouched, as if no one wanted to be seen there tonight. Even the music felt quieter, though she knew it wasn't. She moved through the room with the same steady rhythm, but her instincts kept tugging at her attention. Staff exchanged looks instead of words. Phones buzzed and were silenced too quickly. The private elevator at the back opened twice in 1 hour, carrying men who didn't bother with menus and didn't stay long enough to finish their drinks. Jae-Min Kwon had not yet appeared. That alone meant something was wrong. When he finally entered, there was no dramatic shift, no obvious tension. But Naomi felt it anyway. He walked with the same controlled ease, his expression calm, posture relaxed. To anyone watching casually, he looked unchanged. To Naomi he looked alert. He didn't sit at his usual table. Instead, he paused near the edge of the room, exchanging brief words with two men Naomi had never seen together before. One nodded too quickly. The other avoided eye contact entirely. Alliances, Naomi realized, didn't always break loudly. Sometimes they loosened quietly, like threads pulled just enough to weaken the whole fabric. As she approached with a tray, she caught fragments of conversation. Nothing explicit, nothing dangerous on its own. Mentions of delays, of misunderstandings, of schedules shifting without explanation. It was all phrased politely, wrapped in courtesy, but the tension underneath was unmistakable. Jaemin's gaze lifted, scanning the room once, then again. When his eyes met Naomi's, he held them for a beat longer than usual. There was a question there, or maybe a warning. She gave the smallest nod, not because she knew what was happening, but because she understood the moment called for awareness. He seemed to register it, turning back to his guests with a faint, unreadable expression. Later, as Naomi cleared a nearby table, she heard raised voices from the private corridor, cut short almost immediately. The sound didn't carry, but the abruptness of the silence that followed did. The restaurant continued to function. Plates were served. Glasses refilled. Laughter returned in measured doses. To anyone watching from the outside, Hanul remained exactly what it always was. But Naomi had learned that real danger didn't announce itself with noise. It arrived quietly. And when it did, it expected everyone to already be listening. Naomi realized something was wrong when the restaurant closed and Jae-Min Kwon was still not there. Hanul emptied itself slowly that night. Chairs were pushed in. Candles extinguished. The soft hum of conversation faded into the scrape of plates and the quiet efficiency of cleanup. Naomi moved through her routine on instinct, but her attention kept drifting to the entrance, then to the back corridor, then to the private elevator that remained unused. He never missed nights like this. Not when the air felt tight. Not when alliances were shifting beneath polite smiles. If he stayed away, it was because he had no choice. By the time the last staff member left, Naomi's unease had settled into something heavier. The kind of worry that didn't come from imagination, but from pattern. She locked the front door, checked the register twice, then stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by the quiet he usually controlled. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a message. It was a call, short, urgent, disconnected before she could answer. Then another. Voices rose outside, unfamiliar, sharp with purpose. Naomi stepped back instinctively as several black cars pulled up along the curb, their engines still running. Men moved quickly. Not rushed but precise. She recognized none of them, and that frightened her more than if she had. One of them entered the restaurant without knocking. His expression tight. His eyes scanning the room as if confirming something. "Close up," he said. "Now." "What happened?" Naomi asked before she could stop herself. The man hesitated just long enough for the truth to slip through his control. "There was an incident." That was all he said. It was all he needed to say. The rest of the night blurred. Naomi sent the remaining staff home, locked the doors with shaking hands, and sat alone at the bar, staring at the darkened room. She told herself not to assume the worst. Told herself that Jae-Min Kwon was not a man the world could easily remove. Still he didn't come back. By morning the city buzzed as usual. News cycled through headlines that never mentioned names. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Naomi learned nothing concrete. Only that a convoy had been stopped, that there had been gunfire, that someone important was in critical condition. And that Jae-Min Kwon had not returned home. Standing behind the counter as sunlight filtered weakly through the windows, Naomi felt the shift settle into place. Whatever had been moving beneath the surface had finally broken through. And nothing, she knew, would be the same again. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and restraint. Naomi hesitated just inside the entrance, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked among the men gathered there. Dark suits, low voices, faces set in rigid lines of control that barely masked something closer to fear. No one laughed. No one checked their phones. They waited, as if the building itself were holding their breath for them. She recognized a few faces from the restaurant, men who usually occupied corners and spoke only when spoken to. Tonight they paced, argued in murmurs, stopped abruptly when a doctor passed, then resumed with sharper edges once he was gone. Naomi slipped into a chair near the wall, hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't belong here. She knew that. But leaving felt impossible. After what felt like hours, a man stepped forward. Older, composed, clearly used to being obeyed. The room stilled around him. "He's alive," he said. Relief rippled through the group, brief and fragile. "But there's been significant trauma. The bullet didn't kill him. The swelling did damage we can't yet measure." Naomi's chest tightened. "Can I see him?" she asked quietly, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The man looked at her for the first time, truly looked. "He doesn't recognize anyone." The words landed harder than she expected. Inside the room, Jae-Min Kwon lay still beneath a web of wires and machines. His face was pale, almost unfamiliar without the alert focus that usually defined him. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked unguarded, human. His eyes opened as she stepped closer. They were calm. "Me." She waited for recognition, for anything. But he only watched her with polite confusion, as if she were a stranger who had wandered in by mistake. "Do you know who you are?" the doctor asked gently. Jae-Min frowned, the movement slow, uncertain. "I don't think so." The room shifted behind Naomi. Voices rose. Questions overlapped. Plans began to form and fracture all at once. Without him, authority scattered. Power searched for something to attach itself to. Naomi stayed where she was. "Do you know me?" she asked softly. Jae-Min studied her face, searching for a thread to hold on to. After a moment, he shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said. "Should I?" The apology hurt more than silence would have. Naomi nodded once, swallowing the ache rising in her throat. "No," she said. "Not yet." As the chaos behind her continued to build, one truth settled with quiet certainty. The man everyone feared was gone. And the man lying in this bed didn't even know his own name. Naomi began coming every day. At first, she told herself it was practical. Someone had to sit with him when the doctors rotated out, when the men in suits stepped away to argue in hallways and whisper into phones. Someone had to make sure he wasn't alone with the machines and the silence. But after the third visit, the excuses stopped mattering. Jae-Min Kwon didn't react to most people. When men he'd once commanded tried to speak to him, his expression closed, polite, distant, uneasy. Their voices seemed to overwhelm him. Too many expectations. Too much weight he couldn't understand. With Naomi it was different. She never stood too close. Never touched him unless he reached first. She spoke softly about small things that carried no pressure. The weather outside the window. The way the hospital coffee tasted worse than it smelled. How the restaurant's back door always stuck in the winter. He listened. Sometimes he asked questions. Not about himself but about her. Where she worked. How long she'd lived in the city. Why she looked tired even when she smiled. "You don't have to be here," he said once, brow creasing as if the thought troubled him. "You don't owe me anything." Naomi smiled, a little sadly. "I know." That answer seemed to satisfy him more than explanations ever could. Doctors noticed it. The way his breathing steadied when she entered. How his eyes followed her without fear. How he tolerated her presence in a room that made him visibly tense when anyone else stayed too long. "She's a familiar anchor," one of them said quietly. Even if he doesn't remember why. Naomi didn't correct them. She began bringing small pieces of the outside world into the room. News headlines, carefully chosen and stripped of names. A paper cup of tea she knew he wouldn't drink but always thanked her for anyway. Silence when that was what he needed most. Once, when alarms went off down the hall and chaos rippled through the ward, he reached for her hand without looking. She let him hold on. Later, after he'd fallen asleep, Naomi sat back and allowed herself to feel it, the pull she'd been resisting since the first day. Not romance, not fantasy, responsibility. She had become the one place his mind didn't recoil from. And as power struggled to reorganize itself beyond the hospital walls, Naomi understood the danger of that truth. Because when a man with no memory chooses your face over everyone else's, it means you now carry something far heavier than his past. You carry his trust. Power did not wait for Jae-Min Kwon to recover. It moved in his absence, quick and opportunistic, slipping into spaces that had once been sealed by his presence alone. Naomi saw it in the hospital corridors first, in the way certain men arrived more often, stayed longer, spoke louder. Arguments that once happened behind closed doors now spilled into corners and waiting rooms. Names were dropped, promises hinted at, loyalties tested with quiet questions and careful pauses. Jae-Min remained unaware of any of it. Inside his room, the world was small and manageable. Bed, window, Naomi's voice. Outside it was splintering. One afternoon, Naomi arrived to find two men standing near his door, their conversation stopping abruptly when they noticed her. One offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He shouldn't have too many visitors," the man said lightly. "Confusion slows recovery." Naomi met his gaze calm. "The doctors haven't said that." The smile tightened. "Things are complicated right now." She understood what he meant. Complicated meant contested. Complicated meant people were already imagining a future without the man in the bed behind her. Inside the room, Jae-Min sensed the tension even if he didn't understand it. He watched Naomi's face closely as she sat beside him, her movements more deliberate than usual. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly. "No," she said immediately. "None of this is on you." He studied her, then nodded, trusting the answer without needing proof. That trust was becoming a problem. Allies argued in hallways about timelines and contingencies. Some spoke of protection. Others spoke of succession. Old partnerships strained under the weight of uncertainty. Naomi overheard fragments she wasn't meant to. Plans forming around a man who couldn't consent to them, couldn't even remember the power being divided in his name. Once, raised voices carried far enough that Jae-Min flinched. Naomi stood, closed the door gently, and sat back down. "You're safe here," she said more firmly than before. He exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders as if her words had physical weight. Later, a nurse pulled Naomi aside. "They're pushing to limit access," she whispered. "They think you're influencing him." Naomi almost laughed. Almost. Influence implied intention, control, strategy. What she felt was simpler and far more dangerous. As the world outside fractured and reassembled itself without him, Jae-Min Kwon remained untouched by the struggle, anchored to the one person who asked nothing of him. And Naomi began to realize that when power tries to replace a man, it first tries to remove the person who reminds him he doesn't need it. The room was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if even the machines had learned when to hold back. Jae-Min lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his expression tightened by a frustration he couldn't name. Naomi sat beside him, hands folded, saying nothing. She had learned that this kind of silence wasn't empty. It was crowded with thoughts that didn't yet have words. "I feel like I'm missing something," he said at last. "Everyone keeps looking at me like I should be someone else." Naomi's throat tightened. She'd been dreading this moment, knowing it would come, knowing she couldn't protect him from it forever. "They want you to remember," she said carefully. He turned his head to look at her. "Do you?" The question landed softly and cut deep. Naomi held his gaze. She saw the man he was now, stripped of history, unarmored, honest in a way power had never allowed. She also saw the man he had been, the weight he carried, the name that bent rooms around it. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. "I don't feel hurt," he replied. "I feel unfinished." Her breath caught. Outside the room, voices rose and fell. Pressure building. Time running out. If she stayed silent much longer, someone else would fill the gap, with titles, expectations, fear. Naomi leaned closer, lowering her voice until it was just for him. "There's a name," she said. "It's not what people use when they want something from you. It's not what they say when they're afraid." He listened, completely still. "It's the name you answered to when no one was watching," she continued. "When you were just you." His brow furrowed, as if something deep inside him had stirred. She hesitated only a second longer. "Jae-Min." The sound of it seemed to settle into the room, gentle but undeniable. His breath hitched. His fingers curled against the sheets. "I've heard that," he whispered. Naomi nodded, tears threatening now. "You trusted me with it." He closed his eyes, and for a moment she feared she'd said too much too soon. Then he opened them again, focused, present. "That feels right," he said. "Like something I forgot on purpose." Relief and fear crashed through her at once. Outside, power shifted. Inside, something far more fragile took hold. For the first time since the attack, Jae-Min Kwon didn't look lost. He looked like a man remembering who he chose to be. Morning light spilled through the hospital window, pale and tentative, as if it weren't sure it was welcome yet. Jae-Min sat upright for the first time without help. The effort left him tired, but steadier than he'd been in days. His gaze followed the city beyond the glass. Cars moving, people living, a world that hadn't paused for his absence. Naomi stood near the window, arms folded loosely, giving him space. She had learned that recovery wasn't loud. It arrived in choices. Small ones, conscious ones. "I remember pieces," he said quietly. "Not events, not faces, just weight." She turned to him. "What kind of weight?" "The kind that makes everyone expect something from you." He exhaled. "I don't know if I want to carry it the same way." That was the moment she understood this wasn't about memory anymore. Men arrived later that morning. Fewer than before. More careful. They stood straighter when Jae-Min spoke, even though his voice remained calm, unraised. "I'm not stepping away," he told them. "But I'm not returning unchanged." Some protested. Others watched, measuring. Naomi stayed silent, her presence steady but unobtrusive. "I'll listen," Jae-Min continued. "But I'll decide. And anyone who can't accept that is free to leave. No threats, no posturing, just clarity." When the room emptied, Naomi finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said gently. "I did." He looked at her then, not with confusion, not with borrowed trust, but with intention. "I know who I was," he said. "And I know who I don't want to be anymore. You didn't give me my power back. You showed me I wasn't only that power to begin with." Naomi felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly. Release. "I'm still a waitress," she said, half smiling. "And I'm still responsible for more than I'd like," he replied. "But now I get to choose how." When she stood to leave, he didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. The space between them felt deliberate, earned. As Naomi stepped into the hallway, she knew the truth she hadn't dared name before. Jae-Min Kwon had reclaimed his identity, but not his old life. And the power he carried now wasn't built on fear. It was built on the fact that, when everything was stripped away, he chose who he would become next.